Hello everyone, this is Ian Hurd coming to you on a wet and wintry August afternoon from Sydney. This is a message recorded for Northern Beaches Christian Centre for Sunday the 9th of August, and I want to share from Isaiah chapter 26, where Isaiah said these remarkable words: "We have a strong city. God will appoint salvation for walls and bulwarks. Open the gates that the righteous nation, which keeps the truth, may enter in. You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you." You will keep him in perfect peace. In Hebrew, that is actually Shalom, Shalom, because Shalom, of course, means perfection and fullness and wholeness and soundness. So Isaiah says that God will keep those who enter this strong city in Shalom, Shalom, when their mind is stayed on him. Now, Pastor Paul O'Sullivan at Northern Beaches Christian Centre has been taking us through a series called Reset and Rebuild, from the history of Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilding the altar, the city, the temple and the walls of Jerusalem after their return from exile in Babylon. It speaks to today's situation and to today's church, but at the same time God has been speaking to me from this passage in Isaiah about the strong city. And I want to draw your attention today to why God said this through his prophet, through Isaiah. What gave rise to this statement, "We have a strong city," in which the people will be kept in shalom? Today I want to help you see the context of what Isaiah had to say. And simply it was this: God was at work, as he's always at work, but at this time he was at work within Israel and among the nations surrounding her with his judgment activity. And God wanted his people to know that for those who are faithful to him and who really trust him, there is a place for them even in the midst of such activity. And as Isaiah speaks of the judgment actions of God, he said this: "With my soul I have desired you. In the night, yes, by my spirit within me I will seek you early." He mentions both his soul and his spirit, by the way. This is in the Old Testament. He understood that we have a soul and we have a spirit. He says, "With my soul I've desired you in the night. Yes, my spirit within me will seek you early. For," now he gives the reason, "when your judgments are in the earth, the people of the world will learn righteousness." That's God's objective. And the reason Isaiah said that we have a strong city and refuge, the reason he says that his soul desires God in the night and his spirit seeks him early, is because something significant from God was going on in the world. And Isaiah used the little Hebrew conjunction ki, which means for, which explains the reason. So he was seeking God for, or because, when your judgments are in the earth, the people of the world will learn righteousness. God's governing judgments were occurring then as they are today. For Isaiah, as it should be for us, this was a time to be seeking and desiring God. Israel stood in the midst of the nations and was intended by God to be the beacon that showed the way to receive God's favour and avoid his disfavour and his judgment. And God's intention within these judgment actions was then and is now that people in the world would learn righteousness. That is God's heart for everyone. That they'd be called back to living in God's right order. The Hebrew word used and translated judgment is mishpat, and it comes from another word, shaphat, which means governing judgment. Now, I can give you a current illustration. Because of the COVID-19 virus, governments across Australia have had to introduce some governing judgments. They're intended to be redemptive. They're intended to help us. They're not intended to be punitive or intended to harm. They're required to have a punitive element, a consequence to them if they're not attended to or adhered to. Of course, some people don't like them. They feel they're being put upon. But the laws which have been introduced for the good of all must have built-in consequences for neglecting or ignoring them. The hope, of course, is that in the long run people will be blessed by following the corrections and the guidances. They'll be saved and they'll save others as well. So there's an illustration that I want to start with in the secular and in the physical realm. And it serves to help us to see what is happening and what's going on in that other realm, the spiritual realm. And before proceeding, let me explain further, and in the simplest terms I can, the biblical idea of God's judgment. Now, God has an inescapable standard by which mankind is designed to live and to function. Jesus summarized that and summarized the law and the principles in two great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and strength, and your neighbour as yourself. And he also expounded on all of that in what's become known as the Sermon on the Mount and the so-called Beatitudes. And of course, all God's principles within his creation, in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm, produce outcomes. They have consequences. Consequences are written in or encoded within the principles. We all recognize that the laws by which the physical world functions cause it to function in a particular way. And we recognize that those principles are encoded in everything. And since we know that, we respect those laws. We respect the law called gravity. We don't need a PhD in physics to know the consequences if this $10 million Ming vase I'm holding in my hand I allow to slip onto the concrete floor or out of my hand, what the consequences will be. To these encoded, written into the system laws of physics, we all pay attention and we respect them. We're very aware of the consequences of disregarding them or even of tempting them. We recognize them, we respect them, and we live by them. We know, again, without a degree in physics, that the second law of thermodynamics, we may not know that's what it is, but we know that it dictates that a garden or a house or a piece of equipment left alone will inevitably deteriorate unless we maintain them. If we don't maintain them, we suffer inconvenience or pain or difficulty, not to mention regret. The laws governing sowing and reaping, too, are a good example of truth and consequence in both the physical and the spiritual realms. If we expect a harvest of cotton, we don't sow wheat. You get what you sow in both the physical and the spiritual realm. If you expect a healthy harvest, you don't sow diseased or corrupted seed. The rule or principle is written in. It's encoded in the seed. The outcome or judgment is encoded and inescapable. And that's why Paul wrote in Galatians 6, "Don't be deceived. God will not be mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." It mocks God to expect a blessed harvest from corrupt seed. And I should say this, these laws, these encoded laws, are not open to our negotiation. God's written in or encoded principles in both realms were intended for us to get the best out of life and enjoy the purpose for which he created us. So when we consider the governing judgments of God, which Isaiah said were happening in his day, we have to remember three things, at least three things, but here are three important things. One, the judgment or outcome is already within the seed that we sow. What is sown is reaped. The judgment or consequence principle is carried within the seed. Two, God's governing activity and judgment is always intended to be redemptive. A college professor of mine used to call God's actions salvific, and that's a good word. It's actually in the dictionary. Salvific. They lead to salvation, or intended to lead to salvation. That is always God's objective. Of course, a day will come when judgment is no longer redemptive and it becomes punitive. Three, when this is occurring, when God's judging action is happening, we, the people of God, have a safe place. We have a strong city into which God invites us. God appoints, he says, salvation for walls and bulwarks, and the gates are open so that the righteous may enter, and it's the place where he keeps his own in perfect peace, in Shalom, Shalom. Nations and cities and civilizations rise and fall, as we know. Some begin nobly and they rise and they stay strong for a time, and then moral corruption and decadence overtakes them and they fall. They begin to think that the seed they sow won't matter. Others rise by corruption and quickly fall by the same corruption and decadence. Most of them have in common that they think they will be the one that will last forever. Theirs will provide the answer everyone in the past has looked for and has failed to find or provide. Now, in the spiritual realm, we are easily persuaded that we can negotiate or rationalize, or worse still, we decide rationalize the existence of these laws, or worse still, we set up on our own and decide we will make the laws and the rules, thank you very much. Of course, that's what Adam and Eve did. But yet, the laws are already encoded for our welfare, for our safety, for our blessing. So why is it that we balk or rebel or rationalize or try to negotiate with God's laws in the spiritual realm? Or worse, we don't believe those principles, or we pretend there'll be no pain when we ignore them or break them or try to bend them. Well, let me remind you, as Jeremiah said, the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. In this physical realm, I'm already persuaded that if I drop the Ming vase, the consequence will be very, very costly. Our heart doesn't spend any time trying to persuade us. It won't. And it won't matter. Unless, of course, I'm a person who gets some kind of perverse pleasure from watching valuable things rendered worthless in an instant, or unless I am deceived. For example, I might, under the influence of a narcotic or a hallucinogenic drug, think that the vase won't break, or the fire won't burn me, or that I can fly from the top of a building. But unfortunately, my deceived state will have no effect whatever on those fixed and encoded laws. Those built-in laws just keep on functioning despite my state, my condition, or my deception, or despite my ignorance of them, despite, in fact, my defiance of them. And in the spiritual realm and the realm of the heart, a similar thing occurs to persuade us that the rules can be broken. For there is a deceiver at work to bring us into a state of narcosis or even hallucination, so that we begin to believe lies. There won't be any pain or downside to my foolish or rebellious actions. And in fact, the arch-deceiver will say, as he did at the beginning, look, this action you're about to take will result in you feeling good and being happy and fulfilled. This will bring you to fulfillment as a person and even to a kind of godhood. You will be as God. The deception of our corrupted heart and of the deceiver is that this is the good way. This is the best way, and that it will lead to life. You see, the deceiver has not changed since that far-off day in Eden, when he said, even God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you'll be brought to godhood. You'll be in charge of life yourself and of your destiny. When God's principles, which are just as built into the spiritual realm as the natural realm, are violated, watch out. Consequences kick in. Pain, enormous cost, and always regret. And that's usually what is meant by God's judgment. And it's why the principle is, you sow sin, you reap death. That is, separation from God's presence. And just as you can't beat or negotiate gravity, you can't get away with the violations of God's created order. Now, our secularized society, in its rebellion against God's order, has been with greater acceleration sowing seeds of desecration of God's covenant of marriage, for example, and of family. We've said, we can invent our own arrangements, thank you very much. We've sown the corrupted seed of relativism. We've decided that we will decide what's right and wrong for us. We've decided that if an action doesn't appear to harm anybody else, or if it takes place behind closed doors, it's perfectly legitimate. We've called what God says is wrong, right, and what he says is right, wrong. We've worshipped the goddess knowledge as though she will deliver us from all evil. For years, nations and peoples and governments have been saying, we don't want or need your God. We don't want the Bible. Get it out of our schools and out of our courts and out of the marketplace and out of our lives. We can do perfectly well without that, thank you. This has been the sowing of the seeds of self-satisfaction and self-government and self-aggrandizement, but also of self-destruction. It's corrupt seed. We've rolled in the dirt with dogs and expected to walk away without fleas. We've sown corrupt seed, yet expected a good harvest. We are getting a harvest, but we don't like what we're getting. I believe God is saying, okay, you're determined to desecrate and to trash my ways and invent your own, to suit your own desires and your own lusts. I'm just reminding you, please be aware that the laws and the principles I have built into everything and into that realm cannot be trifled with. They have consequences. There are inevitable consequences. When bent or broken, it will always and irrevocably mean pain, distress, and things going more wrong than they already are in your broken world. I believe God's judgment consequences are active in the world, but as always, they are redemptive. The strong city, the place of safety and of shalom, shalom, or perfect peace, has been provided for us. Anyone can enter, but to enter involves a change of mind, repentance. God says, my desire is to save and to rescue. My desire is to bring you into this strong city where you are sheltered and covered and protected with me. But it can only occur in cooperation with me, not by ignoring or abandoning my principles or pushing me away. Only together with me can we make creation work productively, and we'll see healing and safety and fruitfulness and blessing. Listen, the gates of the city are open for all and for any who will enter. It's God's city of safety and peace in the midst of turmoil and distress. Now, you may be listening to this message and you long for this shalom that's offered. You long for perfect peace. How can it be in the midst of all of this turmoil and the stuff that is bringing us anxiety all the time? You may be listening and you desire this. You long for the shalom that comes even in the midst of the craziness of our world today. We enter through the one who called himself the gate. Jesus said, I'm the gate. Jesus Christ is the way. You can call on him immediately. He's that close. At this very moment, he is close. The scripture says he's not far from any one of us. He just waits to bring you into safety, into peace today. Let us know if you need help. Leave a comment or an email address on this channel. I want to pray. Father, thank you that all your actions in the earth are redemptive and purposeful. Thank you that in the midst of every difficulty life throws up, you invite us into a place of safety and shalom, peace with you. You indeed are the only one who can provide this. May we each deliberately go there now, find that place in you today, tonight. God bless you. Thank you.